welcome all of you throughout the world that's watching on Zoom. I take this opportunity once again. If you're following on Zoom and you're comfortable doing that, that's fine. But if you'd like to brave and come out and join us live, you're more than welcome next Wednesday to be here live and in person. It's entirely up to you, Zoom or in person. But if you do come in person, we do serve lunch after class. If you're on Zoom, get your own lunch. Sorry. Wednesday evening, 7:30, which means tonight we're doing the story of Joseph and his brothers. We are in what we call Act 2 of the story of Joseph. If you'd like to join us tonight, that's on Zoom. If you need the link, go to jewishacademy.com and you can get the link right over there.
Is it only Zoom?
It's only Zoom. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Every single one of us know these lines. You know, before I begin, I just said this line with someone on the phone who's in the ICU, literally in the final moments of his life. He's not in California, so I couldn't visit him in person. He's in a different state right now. But I'd like to ask you all to say a prayer as his soul goes through a transition from this world to the next world for a very dear friend of mine named Mehdi Mohammadi. Mehdi Mohammadi. I met Mehdi Mohammadi some 25 years ago, perhaps 30 years ago. He was a handyman. He was our handyman at Chabad. He was our handyman in my house. And he became a very close friend. He also had a job at the Hyatt Hotel here in Westlake. So all of our events, and we had many events at the Hyatt, he would be involved in setting them up for us. Mehdi had a young daughter named Honey, who was the same age as my daughter. And every time Mehdi would come to my house, he would bring Honey, and Honey and my daughter became friends. And then Honey got ill. There was a problem with her heart. She needed heart surgery, and he insisted that I, as a rabbi, pray for his daughter, although he's a Muslim. He wanted me to pray for his daughter, which of course we did. And Honey recovered magnificently. It's a beautiful girl. Just spoke to her a few minutes ago. She's by her father's bedside right now. And this relationship blossomed. We became a really close with his son, close with his daughter, close with Mehdi. And then 9/11 took place. And we were having high holiday services. Remember, it took place around Rosh Hashanah time. We were having high holiday services at the Hyatt for Rosh Hashanah. And the Hyatt asked Mehdi Mohammadi not to show up because it will make the Jews uncomfortable if a Muslim by the name of Mohammadi was there a few days after 9/11. And Mehdi called me and told me that he was been asked not to come in. And I called the Hyatt and I said, Mehdi Mohammadi is my family. Please, he's there. And he was there. Why did I say Shema Yisrael with Mehdi Mohammadi a few minutes ago as he's leaving this world? One of the times he was in my house, Mati was getting ready for Shabbat, and she put the candles on the table. And Mehdi Mohammadi says, my grandmother used to do that on Fridays. And we all just stopped and we said, your grandmother? My grandmother Rachel used to light Shabbat candles every Friday. Is Rachel your mother's mother? Yeah.
Wow.
I said, Mehdi, you now need to pray 8 times a day. 5 as a Muslim, 3 as a Jew, because you're just as Jewish as I am. Mehdi Mohammadi is a Jewish Muslim. He was raised in a Muslim home. He believes in the Muslim faith, but he also now knows that he's Jewish. And in a whispering voice, he said, Shema Yisrael today. Perhaps God should give him a few extra days to spend some time with his family as he makes his transition from this world to the next.
And that's
very,
why
very
he's
special
to you.
Special human being, a very close friend, dear friend, and he will be welcomed into the heavenly world and given a very special place in heaven. We say, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And it should be these words, that I command you today shall be on your heart. Teach them to your children, V'dibarta speak about them. Shiftecha b'veisecha, when you lie down, when you walk in your, the shiftecha is when you sit in your house, when you go on your way. V'shachbecha v'kumecha, when you lie down and when you rise up. Ukshartam le'osal yadecha, you shall tie them as a sign on your arm. V'latotafos beineinecha, ornaments between your eyes. Uchasaftam, you shall write them al mezuzot, on the mezuzah. Beisecha, that will be on your house, uvisharecha, on your gates. That's the first paragraph of the Shema. One of the themes that you picked up in this very powerful prayer of the paragraph. So we have the theme of the unity of God. God is one, Hashem Echad. We have the theme of love of God, of sacrifice to God, for God. We have the idea of diligent study of His Torah, of passing it on to our children and educating our children, and surrounding ourselves with reminders of God, the tefillin and mezuzot and other ornaments and traditions that remind us on a constant basis of God's presence in our life. So I'd like to review some of these themes with you. First theme, unity of God. We talk so much about God is one, God is one. What does that mean? God is one. So one God means that everything else out there, every power, every force, every obstacle is quote unquote no God. If God is one and only one, everything outside of that is no God. If there is only one God, by definition, everything else that exists is no God. What do I mean by this? One God means that the same God that is above is the same God that is below. It's not two different gods. We often think when we pray of God above. When you think of God, we each have different imaginations when we come to that, but we're all thinking high up, heavenly world, whatever you think heaven looks like. Whether it's mountain areas, forest areas, right? Everyone has their own visual when they think of that. Even though it's beyond visual, the fact is we're humans, and so we have some element of visual. But we're thinking up. But God is below too. The same God that's up is the same God that's right here, right now. One God. Everything outside, every other force that exists is not a God. It could be that it has influence, so to say, it has energy from God, but is not God. There is only one God. There are no mini gods. There are no mini creators. You see, all ancient and even modern polytheistic ideas are based upon seeing many contradictions in the world. Everything we see really is a contradiction, if you think about it. There's heaven and earth. Well, they seem to contradict one another. There is constructive forces that do good things. There's destructive forces that do bad things. We see that on a daily basis. There's day and night. That's different. There's the fall season and the spring season. They seem to be going in opposite directions. Leaves falling off, the leaves are growing. As we just spoke about, Mehdi, there's living and there's dying. The same time we hear of someone leaving this world, we get a text from Wendy Levinson from Israel that her daughter just had a baby boy. Mazel tov. There is excitement, there is mazel tov, there is living, and then there is the opposite of that. There's eating and there's starving. There's rising and there's falling. There's loving and there's hating. There's joy and there's sorrow. There's freedom and there's subjugation. There is spiritual and material. We can go on, but we see contradictions wherever we turn, which has led many to the conclusion that there are many gods, that each of these have a captain, so to say. And that's what some of the ancient myths were about, that there is a sun god and a moon god, and they do battle. There's an earth god and a heavenly god, and they do battle. There's a rain god and a cloudy god, and they do battle. Each force was a god. The statement of Judaism in this very simple, powerful line, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. It does away with all of it. It's all one. Yes, God creates various different conflicting things in order for us to somehow bring some sense to it, bring some way of making it all work together. But there's one God who controls all, who arranges all, who guides all, who created our bodies and invested within our bodies a spiritual soul, which is part of himself. And that spiritual soul, that neshama that's part of ourselves, has a power unlike any other force of creation in that it has free will, free choice. And that free choice that we have has the ability to take all these conflicting things that we see and unify them and come up with one unified world. It's a tough task that God gave to man. Sometimes it seems like the odds are stacked against us. And it's taken us thousands of years. And we've had many, many accomplishments, and then we have setbacks. But we don't give up. One God also means there are no partners. There are no sons. There's no Trinity in the Jewish faith. It's one God. Now, God has tzaddikim, he has holy people, he has me and you. He has his messengers, but we're not God. We're human beings, or even angels, created with a mission. The mission is given to us by one God. Moses, as holy as he was not God. He wasn't given the title of junior God. He was a prophet of God. And any other great figures that you have, they're not gods, they're human beings. They can rise to what we would call a godly level, which meant they lived their life together in a pattern of what God wants them to do. We can call them godly, walked in God's ways. But we never make that mistake to make a human God, because with God, just one. This one God has many attributes and can be perceived by man to function in these different various attributes. Let me explain. There are times we'll use the term the kindness of God. There's times we'll use the term the mercy of God, right? The justice of God, right? Judgment. Right. Especially look in the high holiday prayers, we're using so many different attributes about God. So are we saying there are different gods? There's a God of kindness, a God of mercy, God of justice? No, what we're saying is this one God has different attributes that he relates to us in. Similar, we call ourselves different names in connection to God. I'll give you an example. Is God your father or is God your king? Is God your master? Both. He's all of them, right? So when I ask you, when you're thinking about God, are you thinking at that moment of Tati, my father, Abba, God? Are you thinking about King God? Are you thinking about Master God? Are you thinking about Creator God? Who are you thinking about? And I'll answer you, it's probably depending on the mood that you're in. If you're appealing to him for something that you need desperately, it's Tati God. Because you know that that's what you would do. You would appeal to your father. If it's forgiveness that you're asking for, in your mind, it'll be King God. But it's all one God. God has various different attributes, and we appeal to him through these various different attributes. We're also God's spouse. It says that Mount Sinai, God married the Jewish people. We are his wife. So you have all different types of relationships. You have the relationship, the shepherd and the flock, where the sheep and God's our shepherd. Various different emotions that trigger when we think of God in all of these different ways. Yet it's all one God. This one God is also eternal, and this one God is infinite. He's above time and space. He can't be limited in any manner. He fills the heavens and the earth. And yet you can feel his presence differently in different places. Even though God is everywhere, we just said he's in heaven and he's here right now in the Dora Hills. But there are places on earth that you will feel his presence in a stronger measure. Okay. Give an example, anyone?
I was up at the North Pole, the most furthest land, is a Russian island.
And you felt
And there's
something.
a sheet of ice. And we're mesmerized. There's no other
And you
humans
felt
around.
something
there.
spiritual right
Yeah,
there, right?
It has a magnetic.
What other examples do you have? You go to the Western Wall, especially those that go for the first time in their lives, see their faces.
Right.
The first time, you'll see the magnet. You literally see this magnetic pull. You know, when they're embracing stone and embracing a wall, they're feeling something. There's an emotion there. Yeah.
Yeah, example, in the 6-Day War, when our paratroopers
Right.
entered Jerusalem and they came to the wall,
Right.
young guys, 18, 20-year-old kibbutzniks, you know,
Cry.
no religion, nothing.
They felt it.
And they felt it and they cried.
Cry. And
Where
then-
did they
and
just
then
go
you
walk?
couldn't explain the emotion. It's
Yeah,
stone. It's a
right,
stone. There's a
right.
stone there. Privately,
Right.
no. They felt it. Go to Hebron and go to the burial place of our patriots. You feel something different. There is different intensities of where you feel that element of spirituality. But that doesn't mean God isn't in the other places. He's everywhere, but there are places where you feel it far more intense. Why? Something holy happened there. When something holy happens somewhere, someone holy is buried somewhere, there is a holiness that remains. The Kotel will forever be holy. Whether it was in Arab hands or in Jewish hands, it was always holy because the Holy Temple was right next to it.
It's
And
all
therefore it
Jerusalem.
remains holy, and everyone feels it. You just get the sense of that presence. I'll give you an example, okay? There in the ear right now, there's a lot going on that you don't see with your eyes.
Mhm.
Right? If you had a transistor radio and the old-fashioned antenna, it would pick up different radio stations.
Right
You
here.
have cell phones that have Wi-Fi, right? The computer is picking up Wi-Fi and it's sending out messages in Zoom, right? Every one of you have a phone, I think, and it all is getting, it's various different things. You're getting emails while you're sitting here. Someone is typing something, it could be in China, putting your name there, and boom, you don't see any wire, you don't see any tunnels connecting here to China, and it's coming to you instantaneously because there are things in the ear that drive. There are places where the Wi-Fi is weaker, there are places where the Wi-Fi is stronger. That's why you see the 5 lines, the 3 lines, the 1 line. It's everywhere. There's far more intensity in some places. Sometimes did you hook up the Wi-Fi to the plug? Yeah, why? Because being that we're going on Zoom, we want it to be stronger. So stronger is you plug it into a landline. Jerusalem got the Wi-Fi there, very strong.
Very strong.
Very strong. So the email is more direct. The text message gets through. It doesn't get blocked for a few
I
seconds.
didn't see anybody plugging a wire.
It's automatically plugged. Jerusalem is plugged in
Yeah, right.
all time. All time. And so that's why you feel something tingling within you when you're at a holy place, and you just know. The same thing would be a place of nature. That was Jack's example. People feel it when they go to Arizona and they see the Grand Canyon. And they say, wow, I see God's creation, and you feel closer. There's something that's there. God also, the idea of one God, as we say in the Shema, as part of the faith of the Jew, is that God has no physical form. Now, anytime you mention this, you get hit with questions right away. Is 1 second. The Torah puts physical form when it talks about God. The Torah goes ahead and says the outstretched arm of God. God has no physical form. How is there an outstretched arm of God? The Egyptians say that's a finger of God. The Egyptians say that was the hand of God. The Torah talks about God getting upset and his nostrils flared. Does he have nostrils?
No.
God says, let me go down and see. Is there a let me go down? Is there a stairway? Is there an elevator that God says, let me go down? We have various different, and God saw. What does it mean God saw? Does he have eyes? God heard. What does that mean? Does he have ears? So all of these words in the Torah have to be studied under the general rule. God has no physical form. Why then all of these words? Because the Torah is speaking to us human beings. And we speak in a certain way that we understand things. So God saw means he's paying attention to something. He's focusing on this. That's on the agenda now. His nostrils flared. He's upset, disappointed by the free choice of man. All of these, as Maimonides says, are anthropomorphic words that are being used because it's describing something that's beyond words. To describe an infinite God is beyond words because words are a creation. So we're using physical creations to describe something that's above creation. So the only way we do it is we give the best examples we can using human terminology. We know we're allowed to do it because God does it himself in the Torah when he talks about himself. So God gave us the permission to use human terms to describe God, so long as we don't make the mistake to actually believe that God has 2 hands and 10 fingers and 2 eyes. He doesn't have a physical form.
This is the interpretation of the people, isn't it?
It's
The
speaking.
finger, the hand.
It's
the eye.
which means if they said this was the finger of God, and then they said this was the hand of God, it tells us that plague was 5 times worse than the first, because that was the finger of God going after us, and now it's the hand of God.
Right.
So we see from the expressions that they're using the force of how they interpreted it.
Yeah.
But there are times that God will use human terms about himself in the text of the Torah. And that's because he wants us to relate to some aspect of him in the ways that we can understand it. So in similar verses throughout the Torah, body parts and actions attributed are used all in metaphor terminology throughout the Torah. You have always throughout the Torah, the eyes of God are always upon it, referring to Eretz Yisrael. The eyes of God are always upon it. Again, does God have eyes? What does it mean? That there's a very special relationship that God has with the land of Israel.
He even has wings, right?
The angels have wings.
Yeah.
Kanfei Neshara. He has a throne. Yeah, he has a throne. Does God really sit on a chair?
Yeah.
Who made that chair? What type of material did they use, right? Next, God created the world in a system of partners, right? There's heaven and earth, sun and the moon, Adam and Eve, male and female. There's partnership. There's one exception. That's God. There's no partner to God. Everything else was created in a system of partners. Every aspect of creation needs something to lean on, except God. Theme number 2, and that is the submission to the reign of God. Now that we talked about the one God, now the Shema comes along and says, now we need to submit ourselves to the reign of God. God is the creator of the world, and he is our king. And he makes laws, and he puts these laws in place so that we can live in peace and harmony, so that we can live with purpose. Now, those that are really close to the king, they know why the king is passing these laws. They understand what the king has in mind. The regular subjects, perhaps in the kingdom, they may not understand the reason, but they do understand he's the king. I better listen. The closer we get to God, the more we study the Torah, the more spiritual we get ourselves, the more we will glean understanding of why he gave us these mitzvahs. But until we get there, we're his subjects. These are the laws he gave us. If we believe that he cares about us, then we believe that these laws are not here to make our lives miserable. It's not that he just wants to see how much he could mucha us. You know what the word mucha is? How do you describe mucha? Disturb, bother, right?
Yeah.
Tease. God is not into the muching business. He's not here just to make our lives complicated. Yes,
How
annoying.
do we
Very
know the
good.
difference between what the priest put in and what the did?
Let's just start even with the biblical. We can get into this discussion of the biblical and the rabbinical in its right time. But the laws that are clearly there from the Torah, right? I can make a great defense for all the rabbinic laws, but that would take me off my way of thinking for right now. But let's just talk about even the laws themselves. You can look at it in 2 ways. You can look at it as he's this king that just likes to throw laws out every day. He has this mishigas. He sends another one our way. This food you could eat, this food you can't eat. What does it bother him? If I like the taste of this food, I should eat it. But the more we get to know God, the more we realize he's giving it to us for us. He doesn't benefit. We benefit. He benefits because we will then fulfill the purpose why he created us. That's level 2. Level 3 is I begin to understand, wow, that was brilliant of God to come up with that. I can use one example let's just do that for now. Passover. Okay. He gets into you got to eat matzah, you got to have maror, you got to have a Passover Seder, you got to, so many detailed laws of Passover in the Torah. Now, he wants us to remember that our ancestors were slaves in Egypt. That's what he wants us to remember, that he took us out with all these miracles. Okay, so that we're forever indebted to him and we understand that he took us out and he's against slavery, all the messages. He wants us to get that message and he wants us to pass it on to our children and their grandchildren. So why not just tell us on the night of Passover, speak to your children and grandchildren and tell them the story? That's what you want.
Yeah.
Why do I have to eat the matzah for? It's 3,000 years old. It takes 3,000 years old, right? God understood back then that unless something is attached to a ritual, it fades away. If there's no ritual of the Passover Seder, sitting at the table,
Right.
with actual traditions, all these things,
You'll forget.
we wouldn't be giving that lecture at night to our children. It just wouldn't happen. It would happen for 5 years, and then it would fade away. Traditions are the vehicle that make it happen. It's what makes it happen. It's what makes that night special. And so in every one of the mitzvot, the more we delve into it, the more there's brilliance into what God is telling us to do. Why he wants us to put on film, why he wants us to keep Shabbat, why he wants a mezuzah at the door. If at first we don't get it, let's try doing some of it anyway. Why? Because he's the king and he loves us and he's there for us. But the more I study about it, the more I'll understand.
Yeah.
That's the idea of submission to the reign of God, is working on ourselves to know that if he gave us a commandment, he gave it to us for us, not to be a burden on us, not to make life difficult for us. Theme number 3, love of God. Now, when we studied love of God 3-4 years ago, whenever it was, we delved a great deal of time into it. This is more of a summary, so I'm just going to do it briefly. The opening question is, how can you command someone to love? Love is an emotion. Okay, you could command me to take 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. You can command me to try to do 10 jumping jacks and 10 push-ups. You can command me, doesn't mean I can, but I can try. Right? You can command certain actions. How do you command an emotion? How do you turn it on? You must love. How do you must love? You either love or you don't love. The Ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you shall love God, your God. And again, I'm just going to do it rather briefly, but the Shema is placed a little bit deeper into our prayers, which means it doesn't start our prayers. There's a lot of prayers that come before. And the reason there's a lot of prayers that come before is because what these other prayers do is it builds on the love. It makes the case for love. And it starts with those morning blessings of everything that God has given you. And every time that God has been there for you. Now, we clearly go into our prayers with that all the other list of the things that we need from God. But we need to get used to also having the other list of the things that God has given us. And the more we build on that, the more we focus on what God has done for us as a people and as an individual, the more the love itself starts building. So I would say this again in a short answer. Love takes work. It's not one of those commandments that you could just decide and click the switch and it's there. It takes effort. To love God is a constant, daily effort. It's a daily workshop. You got to work on it every day. If you don't continue to work on it, the love fades. If you don't continue to work on your marriage, the love fades. It takes effort. Marriage takes effort. Any type of love, any relationship takes love, takes an effort. Any loving relationship especially takes effort. Our relationship with God, and it has its bumps, just like every marriage, and it has times of marriage counseling, and it has times that we need therapy. But God promises us he's never going to divorce us. I will go through as many years of therapy as it takes. But I'm stuck with you and you're stuck with me, so let's learn to love one another. That's why it's such an important part of the Shema. The word for love in Hebrew is the word ahava, which comes from the word hav, which means to give. To give, hav, to give of oneself. The commandment to love God means to be prepared to give oneself over to him, to be attached, to give over all of your heart. The word for love him with all your heart in the Shema is the word levavecha. It should have said libcha. It says levavecha. That's plural, as if you have two hearts. Love him with all of your hearts, plural. Some say it means the heart of hearts, the depth of your heart. And some say, as it says in the Talmud, it's referring to both of your souls. You see, you have a godly soul, which demands God's love. But you also have an animalistic soul. There's an animal soul within us. Animal soul means the soul that drives our natural inclinations. The desire to eat, the desire to sleep, the desire to work, the animalistic, that which we have in common with an animal, human tendencies, and then we have godly tendencies. The godly tendencies we get from the godly soul, the human tendencies we get from this animalistic soul.
Is it a kind of a bipolar?
Yeah, they conflict with one another. They struggle with one another until they get used to one another and they get to understand one another. But there's a lot of conflict that goes on over there. The Shema is saying, I don't just want the love of your godly soul. That's easy. I want the love of your animal soul. I want your animalistic part to also come to a conclusion that it loves God. You see, Hasidic teaching tells us the animal soul is not bad. It has within it an evil inclination, but the animal soul, to be human, is not bad. It's powerful. It's what you do with it. The energy that the animal soul has is a very powerful energy. If you kill your animal soul and you just put it down, which means you stamp out all animalistic desires, and you're just left with your godly soul, you may be lofty and holy, but you're not fulfilling your job as a human being. As a human being, there is the animalistic part of it. And the animalistic part has energy to it that you can do great things with it. So why Shabbos table? Why is so much of the focus on Shabbat, the food of Shabbat? When you talk about your bubby's challah and your bubby's gefilte fish, there's holiness there. That food can be elevated and made spiritual.
But I'm also hungry.
And so are you eating because I'm an animal that wants to eat, or am I eating because I'm a human being that wants to serve God?
Yeah.
That's the transition we have to make. Now, I'm not making myself so righteous that every time I drink my Mountain Dew and eat my Pringles, I'm thinking of God. I'm with you. I get it. I'm talking about what our goal has to be, and that we have to work our way, that even the animal soul within us also has this love for God. Theme number 4. Self-sacrifice. I will start this week, but I will not finish it this week because I have a lot of notes to say on this and some stories to share. So this will be continued next Wednesday at 12:30. The Shema said the words "B'chol nafshecha," with all of your soul, and the Talmud says, even if it means giving of your very soul, that we love God with everything. That even if it means giving ourselves completely away, and we have heard and seen throughout history the idea of Kiddush Hashem, people giving their life to sanctify God's name. Jews have died for the sake of keeping Judaism alive and not abandoning our faith. So this needs to be clarified. Because as Jews, we believe in life. Everything we focus on is to live. We don't want to die. So although there are so many stories, and we'll go over some of them that talk about the great individuals who gave their lives for God, it doesn't mean they wanted to die. But oppressive governments forced them to choose God or death. Going all the way back to Abraham, he was the first to face this choice. When Terach said, you either acknowledge that I am God or I throw you into a fire. He refused to acknowledge Terach as God. But we are in no haste to die. We believe that this is the world we're meant to elevate godliness. But at the same time, we're prepared in the name of God, in the name of Judaism, in the name of godliness, in the name of Torah. If it meant that we have to give up our very lives, we're prepared to do so.
I have a fundamental question.
Go ahead.
When we sacrifice our body, not the soul.
Not the soul.
So the soul still lives.
Yep.
Chaye olam.
Yep.
Right? So when you say people have sacrificed the soul, that's one
They've
question.
given it.
They do
Seerat
sacrifice.
means they've given it over,
Give it, okay. Oh,
which
okay.
means
Not,
it's not destroyed.
okay.
It's not destroyed.
Oh,
They've
yeah.
given it over and now it's in a heavenly world.
Okay.
But even though we can make the case, hey, so they're in the heavenly world and therefore they're better off, their preference would have been to been here.
Yeah, but we don't know that, because maybe on the other side, it's good that we're here. Yeah. Anyway,
There's a subject I don't want to touch.
yeah, that's not, yeah.
But you're leading me there.
Yeah,
There's a law in Judaism about suicide.
yeah,
It's a very painful subject. And the discussion in Judaism that suicide is murder. And then there's the discussion that says that the suicide that we're all aware of today is not suicide. That's not suicide. If someone commits suicide today, that's an illness. That's not the Torah definition of suicide.
Right.
If someone commits suicide, then they're ill, they're depressed. Depression is an illness, just like cancer is an illness. There's no difference. One's an illness, the other one's an illness. The depression that the Torah is really talking, the suicide that the Torah is talking about is the rational, the intellectual conclusion. Everything is great here, but if everything is great here, could you imagine how much greater it's in heaven? So let me leave here and go there. Not because I'm depressed, not because of anything, but if that's heaven and that's closer to God, as good as things can be here, it's better over there. So let me say goodbye. Judaism is so afraid of that intellectual conversation that it says that you will be guilty of murder, of murdering someone else if you did that. Why? Because God put you here in this world.
right, because we have a mission.
Because you have a mission here in this
Right.
world.
Yeah.
So just understand that any of those readings that you may read about the severity of suicide is not talking about the suicide that we are familiar with, because that's pure illness. Okay, let me give you one story for this week on the Seerat Nephesh, on self-sacrifice, and I'll reserve the rest for next week. The year is 1929. There was a young man by the name of Menashe who lived in the city of Hebron.
Which?
Hebron.
Okay,
Hebron.
I understand.
This Menashe was considered the black sheep, not just of his family, but of the entire Jewish community of Hebron. He was a rebel. He didn't follow the traditions of his people. The majority of the people that lived in Hebron were quite religious. He would ride around on Shabbat on his motorcycle through the Jewish community, smoking a cigarette just to spite them and to show, look, I don't respect the laws. Worse than that is he would hang out in the Arab cafes with his Arab friends. That's where he would hang out, not amongst his Jewish community, but he made himself very comfortable in the Arab community, and he was one of them. Then came Saturday, August 22nd, 1929.
Yeah.
That's the day of the Hebron massacre.
Yeah.
Armed Arabs came streaming in from all sides, beating and stabbing and shooting any Jew that they saw in sight. After they killed Jews in the streets and in the synagogues, they began going house to house, looking for sacrifices. They arrived at the house where Menashe was sitting with his Arab friends. And the gang leader points to Menashe and asks the others, who is he? And the rest say, no, leave him alone. He's one of us. And they left him alone. And they went to the next house. Menashe couldn't bear hearing these words. Leave him alone, he's one of us. And he jumps up and he yells, no, I'm not one of them. I'm a Jew too. So although all his life he drove his motorcycle, he smoked his cigarettes, he hung out in the cafes, but when he was identified, he's one of us, something in his soul said, I can't let that stand. And he jumps up and he yells, no, I'm not one of them. I'm a Jew too. If you know the story of that day, if you visited the museum in Hebron about that day, 67 innocent men, women, and children were murdered that day, on the day of the Hebron massacre. One of the 67 was a Jew named Menashe. He was butchered by these hooligans after making his declaration, I'm a Jew too. The Talmud tells us that a person can acquire his entire world to come in 1 second, in 1 instant. Although we're not God and we don't sit in judgment, I think we would rest our case to say that Menashe found his way into the heavenly world in that one powerful declaration. Everything else was a facade, but that was real. I'm a Jew too. And with that, his soul left this world and entered into the heavenly world. This ability of a Jew to stand up, knowing that it puts their life at risk, is not reserved just for the holy. It's something that has taken place throughout history with the simple ones. It's there within each and every single one of us. This power of Seerat Nephesh, this power of being able to stand up against all odds and say, I'm a Jew and I'm proud. And I may not have practiced it, and I may not believe it all, but that's who I am. That's Seerat Nephesh. We'll continue next week. Thank you all those on Zoom who have been joining us. Thank you those live who are here. And again, 7:30 tonight, Act 2 of the story of Joseph and his brothers.